All right, so we're diving into a topic today that's, let's just say it's got a certain reputation.
A bit of mystique, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly. We're talking about peat and its role in the world of whiskey.
And it's more than just smoke and mirrors, I can tell you that.
I've heard that.
Yep.
I mean, you see a bottle that says peaty and you kind of think, okay, campfire, got it.
Yeah.
But there's got to be more to it, right?
Oh, absolutely. So much more. It's like this whole hidden world of flavor.
Okay, color me intrigued.
Well, to really appreciate it, we need to start at the source. Peat itself, what is it? Where does it come from?
Lay it on me.
Imagine, picture those really old kind of spooky bogs you see in like Scotland, misty and kind of wild.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
So those bogs, they're where peat forms. Over thousands of years, you have all these plants, mosses, things like that. They die off and decay, but really, really slowly.
Slowly, because it's like waterlogged, right?
Exactly. It's this anaerobic environment, so things don't break down completely.
So instead of turning into regular soil, they kind of build up into this dense, peaty layer.
You got it. And that layer, that's what we're talking about when we talk about peat. It's like nature's compost pile, but it takes centuries, even millennia, to form.
Wow, okay. So we've got this ancient, kind of mysterious substance. But how does it end up in my whiskey?
Well, think back to the early days of whiskey making, especially in Scotland. You've got these distilleries, often in remote areas, and guess what they used for fuel?
Let me guess, Pete.
You got it. Wood was scarce, especially on the island, so peat was the go-to. They'd burn it to heat the stills and dry the malted barley, which is a crucial step in making whiskey.
So that smoky flavor, it's like a happy accident. They weren't even going for that at first.
In a way, yeah. It was born out of practicality, but it ended up shaping the character of these whiskeys in a profound way.
And that's what we're going to unpack today, right?
Yeah.
How something that started as a fuel source became this defining characteristic of certain whiskeys.
Exactly. We're going to dig into the science behind it, those amazing flavors, and even take a little trip around Scotland to explore the regions famous for their peaty whiskeys.
All right, I am so ready for this.
It all comes down to those phenols. Remember those chemical compounds we talked about?
Right, the flavor carriers, basically.
Exactly. When peat burns, it releases these phenols into the smoke, and that smoke, it interacts with the barley during drying.
And the barley just soaks it all up like a sponge.
Exactly. And those phenols, they're what give the whiskey those distinct, smoky, earthy, sometimes even medicinal qualities.
Okay, this is starting to make sense, but I have to ask about something I've seen on whiskey labels, ppm. What's the deal with that?
ppm, that stands for phenol parts per million.
So it's like a measure of peatiness, right?
Precisely. It tells you how much of those smoky phenols made it into the whiskey.
The higher the ppm, the smokier the dram, basically.
You got it. It's like a smokiness scale.
So what are we talking about here? What kind of numbers are we seeing on these labels?
Oh, it can vary wildly. You might see whiskeys with ppms as low as 5 or 10. Those are going to have just a hint of peat.
Subtle smoke.
Exactly. And then you have your 25 to 40 ppm whiskeys. Those are going to have a more pronounced peaty character.
Okay, so starting to get into like bonfire territory.
And then, you can go even higher, 50 ppm, 80 ppm, even over 100 ppm in some cases.
Wow, so those are the peat powerhouses.
Yeah, for the serious peat enthusiasts out there.
I'm intrigued, but let's talk more about those flavors. We've covered smoke, but there's got to be more to it, right?
Oh yeah, peat is multifaceted. Think about it. This stuff has been decomposing for centuries, absorbing all sorts of things from its environment.
Like what, for example?
Well, you get those earthy notes, of course, but also things like saltiness, if the peat bog was near the coast.
That briny maritime character some whiskeys have.
Exactly. And then you get those medicinal notes, almost antiseptic sometimes, iodine.
I've definitely tasted that. Is that from the peat itself?
It's all about the specific compounds in the peat. Different bogs, different flavors. That's part of what makes it so fascinating.
It's like terroir for whiskey, almost.
It really is. And speaking of terroir, why don't we take a little trip around Scotland, explore some of the regions known for their peaty whiskeys.
All right, let's do it. Where are we headed first?
So we're starting our peat tour, and first stop, it's got to be Islay, right?
Islay, the big leagues of peat.
Exactly. This island, it's practically synonymous with peaty whiskey. When you think bold, smoky, intense, you think Islay.
So we're talking about distilleries like...
Oh, you know the classics. Ardbeg, Lafargue, Lagavulin. These are the heavy hitters.
Yeah, I've heard tales of these whiskeys.
And for good reason. They're not for the faint of heart, let me tell you.
So if someone's looking for that quintessential Islay experience, what would you recommend?
Ooh, that's a tough one. There are so many great options.
But if you had to pick one, a good starting point for someone.
Okay, if you want to really dive into the deep end, I'd say a Lafroig 10-year-old.
Classic choice.
It's got that medicinal, almost antiseptic quality some people love, that real coastal peat character.
Definitely not shy on the peat.
Not at all. But Islay isn't the only game in town. Let's head over to the Highlands next.
The Highlands? Okay, what kind of peat are we talking about here?
Well, it's a bit more, I'd say, restrained compared to Islay. Still peaty, but with a different personality.
More balance, maybe?
Exactly. You get that smoky character, but it's often interwoven with other flavors like heather, honey, spices, even a touch of fruit.
Okay, so a bit more approachable maybe for someone who's not quite ready for the full Islay onslaught.
Exactly. Distilleries like Talisker, Oban, they're great examples of that Highlands style.
Right, I've had a Talisker 10-year-old, and I remember those peppery notes along with the smoke.
There you go. It's complex, it's interesting, but it doesn't whack you over the head with peat.
Like it. Okay, so we've done Islay, we've done the Highlands. Where else does our peat journey take us?
Well, we've got to visit Orkney, those wild islands up north.
Orkney, now that's a name I haven't heard in a while. What's their peat game like?
Orkney is interesting. It's like the peat there is subtler, more integrated.
Integrated how?
It's like instead of being the dominant flavor, it kind of weaves itself in with these other notes you get, like honey, heather, a hint of sea salt.
So more delicate kind of peat.
Exactly. It's there, but it's not shouting at you. It's more like whispering secrets.
I like that. Any distilleries in particular we should look out for in Orkney?
Oh, yeah. Definitely check out Highland Park. They're known for that classic Orkney style. And then there's Scapa as well.
Noted. So we've covered some serious peat territory today. What have we learned?
We've learned that peat is more than just smoke.
It's a whole world unto itself.
Exactly. It's got history, it's got science, it's got personality.
And it makes for some damn good whiskey.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into the world of peat and whiskey.
It's been a pleasure.
Likewise. To all our listeners out there, thanks for joining us. And until next time, happy sipping.